Hi, good evening. Your Woodlands County GMP meeting, Wednesday, July 12th, 2023. Call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. And get down to the adoption of the agenda. Anything else from administration?
No, your worship.
Any additions from council? With that, motion. Council Prestige?
Make a motion that the GMP committee adopt the agenda as presented.
Okay, motion on the floor, all in favor? That's carried. No minutes, no delegations, down to 5.1. Schedule of fees, bylaw 596. And that is, just opening it up here. Presented by Joan.
Okay. Good evening, council. So a while back when we had adopted our original development fees, a motion had been made by Councillor Dean that we perhaps review our natural resource extraction development permit application fees. So as a result, we did some canvassing in some municipalities as to what those fees look like in various areas, as well as I did an analysis kind of on what it actually closely costs us for each application that comes through the door, just depending on location, of course, because we have a little different process over in the Pride Valley area versus if it was, say, in Gravel Pit Alley down Highway 43, or those gravel pits located just north and kind of west of the airport. So as a result, looking at the municipalities, they vary anywhere from $0, potentially up to a maximum fee of $100,000, just depending on the location, which appeared to be Strathcona County being the highest out there. Brazeau County being the least at $0. Thought maybe that was a mistake, so I called them personally and spoke with their development officer there. And Brazeau County has $0 for all of their development permits. So no matter what it is that you apply for, it's $0. Their council felt that it was best to encourage people to come in and get their permits. So that was their philosophy. And that was before all of these catastrophes happened. So so I was a little surprised, but yeah, something different. Yeah. So yeah, we're about kind of middle of the road with what we currently have, which is $2,500. But if you look at what it estimated cost analysis for administration and council and the Pride Valley Aggregate Committee to look at an application and go through the process. So in the Pride Valley area, it's roughly about $7,300 is what we would cost based on myself, Peter, and Brenda's time. Vehicle to go and do the site inspection, pull the land title, then of course review the actual application itself, advertising costs, because we have because they are direct control, they are public hearing involved, so we have to advertise those. And we've got, of course, council sitting at the table for either scenario. And then we've got our Pride Valley Aggregate Committee, who reviews applications in the Pride Valley area and then provides a recommendation. So we have those fees as well. And of course, depending on location, we may have to do, because it may draw larger crowds, hall rental. And yeah, so for example, one in the Gravel Pit Alley or west of the airport there, about $5,400, and then like I had indicated, in the Pride Valley area, a little more expensive, about the $7,300. So if council wishes to kind of recover cost, then my suggestion or recommendation would be to move that $2,500 then to maybe a $7,000 application fee, and kind of just balancing itself out between the two. I truly believe that we will have a lot more applications once that area, we have actual access to those northwest of the airport. I think we'll see quite a few. There are proponents that have been in that area for several years, have just not moved on their applications with the province simply because of the access restriction.
Anything from council? Councilor Wilhelm?
To the chair to council, I guess, I like the breakdown from administration here on what our actual costs to do this are. I don't see any issue bringing the fees up for it to make it a cost neutral application between, I don't think there's necessarily any need for other ratepayers to be funding this at a lower fee, but why don't we just make it 2 fees, one for the Pride Valley area and then one for outside the Pride Valley area, and then we're essentially recapturing our costs on both areas and not causing outside of that area to pay a little bit more to offset the Pride Valley.
Anything else from council? Councilor Dean?
Through the chair to, I guess to administration. Joan, did you ask the county of Lac-Saint-Anne why they had set their fee at the level they have? Like what the rationale was there?
Through the chair to Councillor D. No, I did not have a conversation with them. If I recall, the conversation at council was that I think you guys were having a meeting with them and that was going to be broached, one of the questions broached. So no, I didn't reach out to them, sorry.
Yeah, I'd like that that question to be asked of their council, so that when this gets forwarded to our council, we have that information. I have no problem sending this to council for their review. But as I recall, one of the fundamental questions we were asking ourselves is what does the county get out of a gravel development? What's the net coming back to the county? We know there are costs and we're still trying to examine and identify what the total of those costs are. But we don't know what we get. You know, the levy is so low that having a cost recovery is great because at least we're not subsidizing the proponent through this process. But you know, perhaps we might want to look at that fee that Lac-Saint-Anne has and see what they're doing with that.
Any other discussion from council? I do have one quick question. If we end up changing the, and it's just for information, I guess, say we end up on a $7,000 for the application, any applications that are currently running would still fall under the past amounts that they applied for, right? This wouldn't affect any open applications.
Through the chair, that's correct. Anything that we currently have in the office, they've paid their fees and we're just running the process. We currently just have the one that we're awaiting information back that council had requested of them. And yeah, so anything new, or once we've passed the bylaw, then these fees would come into play.
All right. Anything else from council? Not hearing anybody want to make a motion? Councilor Dean?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to, before I make a motion, I wanted to come back to Councillor Wilhelm's question of the split. So that having 2 different fees. Not sure I'm in favor of that. I understand where you're going with that if there's a difference in cost, but I would favor a standardized or just a standard fee across the county. But I wanted to open up to question you to see what your thoughts are on having that 2-tiered fee versus just one.
I guess through the chair to Councilor Dean, that my only concern was having a higher fee like, I'm not sure how many applications we get out of Pride Valley and how many applications we get from the outside of Pride, or inside and outside. But offsetting the costs of Pride Valley to everyone else, I just wasn't certain that's where we wanna go with it, right? Like, if we have 40 applications, just to use a round number, from outside the Pride Valley area and 3 from the inside, then the costs don't really offset, making more than what we're making that less of a neutral cost, is what I'm trying to say. Which is why I thought 2 rates would be good.
Right, John?
Through the chair to Councillor Wilhelm, you're right with respect to the number of applicants that would, are limited down in the valley. I think if anything, we may be able to entertain 1 more, because in the ASP, it is limited as to the number of hectares that can be open altogether with all the operators. So yeah, it will be a limited number in there, and we currently have 2 open, the 1 applicant, and then maybe the possibility of another one in the future, but yeah.
Councillor Prestidge?
Through the chair to administration and council. The thing with making it harder for developers to do a gravel pit, it affects everybody. If you raise the rate to do a development for a gravel pit, it deters developers from doing it. We all use gravel here. Everybody's got it in their yards, on their roads. You talk about Lac St. Anne, on this end of their county, they buy gravel from one of the developers here, because they don't have any there. They've made it so hard, nobody will develop a pit. So, if you wanna make it really hard for gravel developers, cause you say, what's in it for the county? It's what's in it for the residents. Whether they can buy gravel, can't buy gravel, or at a decent price where you can't afford to gravel your driveway. So be careful what you ask for.
I have a question for administration, John, for the costs that we have listed here, say the $5,400 and the 73, are those like an average in the area, or is that typically what it comes out to?
That would be typically what you would see. It's the same process,
Yeah.
regardless of, size of the pit or whatever it is. It's all the same process, as we gotta have because they're direct control, we need to have the public hearings. The only difference with the ASP is that we do have a committee that, of course, meets prior to go through the application. And then they come back to council with a recommended action.
Councillor Wilhelm?
Through the chair to Joan, how many applications do we get in a 5-year span, let's say?
Perhaps 2 or 3.
2 or 3?
The unfortunate part, like I indicated, was that I think we would have seen significantly more that the areas northwest of the airport there. It was just a matter of, because we had, I'm going to say about 6 proponents back there that were ready and raring to go. However, access was the issue, and trying to get that gravel out without interrupting our ratepayers or residents that live in the on the Horn Road area there. So the suggestion was to bring it down along the valley and come out at the bottom of Highway 32, just in town. So a significant cost to those proponents to construct that road and try and get it out of there. So everybody kind of backed off. But I think, if I may, through the AVPA, we're doing a transportation component to see, I guess, traffic volumes in the area. Is there potential to bring maybe those gravel trucks through the airport area to bring out to that particular intersection, and what that will look like. And then if that is the case, it may open that area up and we could see a volume of them coming at us.
Right, Councillor Wilhelm?
Through the chair to council, I think knowing or having the information now that there's only 1 Pride Valley, maybe one more application available in that area. Having two rates probably doesn't make any sense. It overcomplicates it. So why don't we just, or in my opinion, I think we should change the rate again, still just to make it cost neutral to the municipality. But we don't need to have a second rate for Pride Valley. Let's just make it up the rate to 5,500. That covers all our costs, and we're not making any money off of it. We're also not losing any money off of it, and keeps it nice and simple.
Councilor Williams?
Yeah, I don't think it's unreasonable to just cover our costs for it. The levy's not crazy high. I'd be totally in favor of that. The one applicant that we lose a little bit on, I don't think is a deal breaker, but yeah, I'd be in support of the 5,500.
Just my thought coming out of this, given that we're looking at our cost currently, we're setting this for, we'll say if you're looking at $5,500 for cost recovery, with the way that inflation's been going in fuel and wages and whatnot, currently at our rate right now will cover this, but 6 months to 12 months, we could be, again, it's close, but we're still under. I recommend, if we want to look at cost recovery and given where things are at by the time we get other applications, I don't think I would want to see anything less than $6,000, just the way everything's going. I would want that buffer at least in there, so if things cost more in 12 months, we still have the little bit kind of left back in there. Councilor Prestige?
I disagree with that. I think if costs go up, then revise what? You can revise it every year or every 6 months, whatever.
I just would like to at least see if we have something, I agree,
No,
in place so that we're not coming back every 6 months and get another application. Councilor Dean?
Yeah, through the chair, back to administration, to Joan. You said that a cost neutral position would be around $7,500?
I guess if you took the two and, again, I would almost say the $6,000 that Reeve Kush mentioned would probably be reasonable. Because if you take the 7,300 and the 5,400, add those together, divided by 2, kind of works itself out. And those applications, like I say, the majority of them are going to be from this side versus that side.
Councilor Dean?
So I'm gonna go ahead and make a motion, but I'm gonna add a clause that I'd like the information as to what Lac Saint Anne is doing with their fee to be presented to council.
Okay.
Because we're not adopting this right now, council will adopt it later, so. I'd move that the GMP committee forward to council for approval an amendment to the schedule of fees bylaw 596 section 1B4 natural resource extraction from 2,500 to 6,000 pending a review of the Lac Saint Anne fee.
A motion on the floor, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, call the question, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And we're on to draft policy 1519, property tax rate.
Okay.
It's Victoria.
So your worship, this policy in some way is not really a policy, but like a policy to open up discussions between administrations and council to set the property tax. As you can see from this policy is that we want to integrate the county's annual operating and capital requirements as well as the long-term fiscal planning. Since setting up the property tax rates as well as the approval of the budgets are the prerogative of the council, administration cannot make a policy to bound council to determine to do what is the percentage of the reserve. But instead, this is a policy guidance that administration and council will are committed to have conversations and review and revisit all the variable factors in advising council in establishing the property tax rate as well as the approval of the budget. As you can see from the purpose of this policy, we want the decision of setting policy, the property tax rate in an equitable and a transparent manner. And that council, administration, as well as the ratepayers all knowing how the counties prioritize the allocation for projects and programming purposes. So it start off with determining the property tax, and you can see that on page, let me see here, page 3 of the policy, under 3.4, how the property tax rate is calculated. So revenue requirements, as you can see, it is ranging from 3.3B to 3.3E. This requirements is variable. Council determines how we're going to allocate the resources, how we're going to prioritize the projects. And of course, this is net of any government grant. So this is a variable numbers, varies every year. The assessment base also variable because it's based on the market, based on the development and also the market trend. And then divided by 1,000 equal the property tax rate. So, and that is why I said at the beginning is that it's hard for me to set a policy because with variables and then also all this is really council prerogative. I cannot say council must do this and that, but again, this is more like a guidance policy for the administrations and council to have a conversations on. And then as we go to 3E, talks about the surplus and contribution to reserve. Again, this is also council prerogative, and we want to have a conversation is how much we should set aside in the reserve. Again, in the policy, it is just, again, a guidance. That is a different way to do it, whether we want to use the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which is the inflation rate, or whether we use an arbitrary number saying that 10% of the budget. But again, this is all variable, and what we want to do is have a conversation is that how we can make this work, also with the consideration that the ability to pay by the ratepayers. And I also want to draw the attention that under 3.14, that there's the existing policy on the reserve. Right now, we do not actively apply any funding into those reserves, even though the policy allows us to do that. 3.15, water and waste water reserve as well as the airport development reserve. In a perfect world, they're supposed to be funded from the airports or from the water and wastewater. But right now, they are subsidized under our general revenues. And we're going to talk about the water and wastewaters in a separate agenda item. But again, council can make additional contributions if they see fit to allocate some of the general revenues into the reserve, into the surplus or the reserve. I'm going to distribute something when we calculating the property tax rate, how that applies to a typical ratepayers. So once we set up the property tax rate, as you can see that this is more like like a note to the ratepayer, is that how that affects your tax bill. So in 2023, the average property assessment for residential property is $149,000, and the tax rate is 3.3062. So the tax levy for general municipal services is only $495. Again, this is only for the general municipal services. All the requisitions, we have no control of. So, and as you can see that the fund is actually for all the operations for the county, from infrastructures, from airport equipment, protective services, recreation, community services, planning, economic development, agriculture services, administration, and governance. And then every $100 you pay to the county, it goes to those departments. So then that is a calculations for requisitions. And then, of course, depending on your property locations, you either contribute it to the Barhead or the Lexington foundations. Additional information you can see that is based on the 2023 average assessment value. So once we have the total assessment base, and then based on our annual budget, we determine the tax rate. So the residentials and farmland is 3.3062, and then on residential, VIP and linear is 12.928. So one of the things I also want to draw the attention to the council is that under farmland, that is the average assessment value. And so we are proposing is that we want to take advantage of the MGA that allows for the minimum tax, because right now $24.38 doesn't even cover the cost of the postage, the fee that we pay to the assessors. So right now you can see that under Schedule A, minimum tax is $50. So we would like to apply that for those when the assessment value and the tax rate comes under than 50, then we will apply that $50. And then non-residentials, VIP and linear, we talked about that. That is a maximum tax ratios, as you can see under schedules, that we cannot go over 5%. And right now in 2023, the ratio is 3.91. So this is the schedules that I recommend the councils and administration go through that at least once a year before adopting the budget as well as the property tax rate, is that whether we want to revisit the minimum tax that applies to some of the property that have a very low assessment value. And then also the contribution to reserve. This again, just a discussions, and right now this is almost like a placeholder, that whether councils want to, so let's say we have $1 million surplus, what is the percentage to apply to those reserve? For this year's, we have 2 emergency or climate events, and we are in the process of applying for the disasters program funding, but the history told us is that it takes us at least 3 years to get the money from the province. So, and we don't even know that whether we are eligible or whether we will be approved to get the reimbursements. So during all that time, we have to finance all these costs. Even the province later on approve it. So again, should we, in this case, I put down emergency road repairs, reserve 10%, maybe higher or lower is, again, it's the conversations. It's just a beginning of the conversation with the council. The CPI, I used the national rates instead of the provincials or regional rates. The reason is that a lot of time when we go for procurement and purchasing, it's the national CPI that really affects us, not really at the provincial level, because the contractor, they use the CPI at the national level. And then again, as I mentioned, is that when we doing the residential rates and the non-residential rates, we have to make sure that we're within the maximum tax ratio. So this is just a comparison. Again, this is a schedule that I would recommend that if it is approved, we will revisit that at least once a year.
Okay, anything from council? It's a big one, so. Councilor Wilhelm.
Through the chair to administration. So I'm looking at the property tax rate calculation formula that you provided. And I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding the math properly. We're utilizing everything that's listed under item 3.3B to 3.3E
Yes.
In your calculation for the revenue requirement.
Yes.
But I see D is the provincial requisitions. Should those be included in there because they're their own their own line item, right? So do we want to we wouldn't want to be affecting our own calculation of our property tax rate by utilizing numbers that have their own calculation and are just a line item on our property tax assessment.
Yes,
Does that
I
make
can-
sense?
Yep, I can clarify that in the policy, making sure that 3.D is actually calculated separately.
Yeah,
Yep,
okay.
yep.
And shouldn't be included in that property tax rate.
Yep.
Because then we'd almost be
Yeah, even though we're
would still
obligated to.
calculation
yeah,
off, yeah.
Okay.
Question I have for you, Victoria.
Yeah.
When we talk about our commercial tax rates, and we kind of have, I guess, a one line across the board that all of our commercial falls into. Is it possible to split that into two different commercial rates? One for, say, companies that are over 50 employees and one that are 50 or under, for all those ones? I'm just thinking, if you take a look at our airport and the commercial development that we have out there, the tax rate on those businesses is substantially higher than any of our neighboring, like, I guess, industrial areas. And if we want to see some type of growth in there, and I look at it, if we're really high in the taxes, we have no growth, no development, no anything extra's happening there. If we can come up with an extra line for commercial that's, say, 50 employees or under, so a smaller commercial base instead of our larger customers, we might get less per business at the airport, but we might end up with more development at the park we have there, and in the long run end up getting, having something going on there where we actually have more capital running from that area.
Yes, the MGA allows us to have a subcategory, but the only issue is that with the employees is that you really have to define, are we talking about full-time employees, seasonal employees? So usually in other municipality, they actually use by, they segregated either the light industry or heavy industry, or that it depending on the assessed value. Those are more concrete instead of employee because it could be fluctuating.
Even that, just some type of an example, that would definitely work too. I'm just
Yep.
trying to think of some way where we can, while we're working on, say, this policy that we're looking at, if we can have some way to have a differential between, I guess, our large scale commercial and our smaller scale commercial, that might make our commercial park out by the airport a little bit more appealing, or for the people at the airport, development out there a little bit more appealing than we currently have.
Okay. And what you suggest is that also different rates as well, right?
Yeah.
Not only subdivide, okay, yep, okay.
Any other discussion from council?
Yeah,
Councilor Burrows?
sorry, through the chair. Yeah, that's something that we've been looking at for a while now, is that idea around a small business kind of incentive, or a split out for the small business. And I had one printed out here that they, I think in 2017, they amended the act to, 2017, for that 50 employee mark. So we could do it that way, or we could do it through a small business thing or something, but it's certainly something that I'd like to look into. I'm glad that we're having the discussion around the whole operation costs and how do we generate revenue to pay for all these services. I was kind of hoping that we'd have a little more breakdown kind of on vocabulary around assessment and how things really work, how much of the operation is funded through MSI, how much is funded through, well, it's not MSI anymore. It'll be LGFF after this, because that's changing. How much through government transfers, how much through all of these things, and then how much do we have to go to the taxpayer for? That was really the thing. So but again, like you said, this is a conversation around that, and also there's a kind of a methodology in here to denote a certain amount, or 10% of your surplus to certain reserves. And I was hoping that through the asset management, we have these reserves fully identified and actually fleshed out as to what the upper mark of those reserves is supposed to be, so that we know where we're at with with all of our replacement costs and running. Once we have those upper limits flushed out, then we're in a better, you might get a council in that says, oh, well, we're gonna cut taxes. We're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. If they're not looking at the long-term impacts of those kind of things, they may be overcharging, they may be undercharging. And until you kind of get that methodology through, and a good understanding of that through council, it's a risk. So, good start though.
Thank you.
I do like to say, I also, I really enjoy, having the numbers and the breakdown in the sheet that you gave us, Victoria. This is something, especially when we come closer to, I guess, tax time next year or even throughout the year, something that I guess when we have this done where ratepayers can look at it and, for their information also before would be, I think, beneficial for people too. Councillor Willem?
Through the chair to administration, what was the plan then? Because this, like, Chris was saying, this is awesome. Like, so this is a great tool for people that actually want to look at their assessment and understand what's going on. So I really like the way this is broken down. Was the mindset that we would include something like this into our assessment with our assessment? So it would essentially populate their value in here and say, this is exactly where your money's happening. Like this would head off a lot of questions, I think, at tax time.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we can review that. Definitely, we can post that on the website, and we definitely can actually consider that to be included in the tax notice for next year.
Anything else from council? Seeing none, what would council like to do with this? Councilor Wilhelm?
So the recommended motion is that the committee recommends the draft property tax rate policy for council consideration. I don't think it's at that point, right? We would just be accepting it as information at this point and having more discussions in the future.
I think that would probably,
Yeah, Your Worship, so what I heard, there was some clarification required in the policy as well as some additional information that needs to be provided. So I would recommend that you have a motion to bring it back to a GMP for further discussion.
Councilor Wilhelm?
A motion that administration brings back the draft policy at a future GMP meeting for further discussion.
Okay, with that, we have a motion on the floor, any discussion on the motion. Seeing none, call the question, all in favor? With that, it is carried. And on to 6.2, motor grader contracting out criteria. Mr. Vachon.
Your Worship, members of council, at the June 7th council meeting, administration was instructed to prepare contract grader criteria for the GMP committee. The criteria that will be utilized in a request for proposals for the supply of an operated grader is attached. The highlights, 5-year term based on 1,700 hours annually. The bidder is responsible for all expenses associated with the operation of the equipment, fuel, repairs, maintenance, wages, blades, would be responsible to or required to submit $5 million general liability insurance, additionally naming the Woodlands County. Workers' compensation, there would be a prorated fuel price based on the county's price and at the time of bidding. They'd have to make available the make, model, age, serial number of the equipment, require a 14-foot moldboard, 200 horsepower, and no more than 6 years of age. The successful bidder equipment must meet certain requirements like the headlights, flashing flags, ripper shanks, snow blades, dozer blades, snow wings. The county would inspect the equipment before awarding the contract. At all times would be required to be equipped with an adequate set of blades, including ripper shanks and teeth. Would have to, the contractor, the bidder would be considered an independent contractor. They'd have to supply a skilled and experienced operator with a valid driver's license. The operator would be determined by a county representative, as in they submit the person, we would determine if they are suitable. They'd have to be set up with the municipal mobile radio and a GPS unit, responsible for all and any damages to the road facilities as a result of the operation. Commence and discontinue work upon direction of the county. Work and location of required grading would be regulated by the instructions of the county representative. Would have to maintain a 3% grade on roadway, ensure proper drainage of the road surface. General operation like keeping the super elevations, no ridges on the road. Would have to stop or move rocks or hazardous material caused by the grader. Avoid dragging gravel onto dust-controlled areas. Have all the lights flashing and operating as per the Highway Traffic Act. Appropriate signage would be required. The bidder would be required to be available at all times within a 2-hour period of being called out, including weekends, vacations, holidays. Hours of work to be paid would be those while they are actually operating. And the county would reserve the right to add an additional grader if required, or to move that grader to a different area. And they would not be allowed to subcontract out without prior approval from the county. I attached a tender that is a standard throughout the industry. It comes off the Alberta Municipal Supervisors Association website. Any questions?
Sorry, Councillor Wilhelm.
Through the chair to Andre. I said I compared the two of them together, and I just wanted to know, like, just for my own information, the difference. I believe the tender that you provided as an example, and then what we would tender as well. The crown on the roads in the tender provided says 2%, but ours says 3%. What's the difference between it? Why would we have a difference there?
Other than 1%?
Yeah, like I don't really know what that means, to be honest.
Just from the crown to the shoulder.
Yeah.
The difference
Okay.
in that, I believe 3% is, I believe it should be between 3-4%. I don't believe 2% is adequate on a gravel road.
Councillor Prestidge.
Through the chair to Andre. On the age of the grader at 6 years. Okay. Our truck that we have on snowplow for lead court, what's the maximum age we can have there?
As far as I know, we are not limited.
And why are we limiting somebody on the age of the grader?
We want to ensure that unit will be an adequate unit to do the job and available at
So
all
you're
times.
telling me that a 10-year-old grader does not meet that criteria if it's been maintained?
It's hard to, if you supply a 10-year-old grader and you say it's maintained, how do we determine that? Other than, it keeps running or it doesn't. 6-year-old unit, odds are it will keep to the life of the contract. 5-6 year old equipment or a grader is pretty much a standard in municipalities for contracting out.
Okay, my say, my thought, I guess, kind of following like Councilor Prestidge was saying too, and this is, well, I guess, kind of relating to the agricultural industry. People that I know with, go buy the newer equipment and stuff, they tend to get a little bit more like, we'll say it should be more reliable on the field when it goes, but when they break down, the downtime is a lot longer. Just parts getting people, they find that a couple guys I know got rid of their newer stuff, bought older equipment because the parts were cheaper, repairs were easier to do, and in the end, they were spending more time on the field with the older equipment than the new stuff with the breakdowns. I know newer stuff, you have your warranties and everything, it should be more reliable, but there are also benefits to some of the older stuff too, I found. And my other thought on that is if you have, say, a 10-year-old grader and they say it's good and they're on a beat and they're supposed to be doing it and they're under contract to get that done, if the grader breaks down, it should still be up to them to be able to have something in there to replace that and at least keep that beat going if they're under contract. So if it breaks down on their end, I'm assuming that, somewhere in the contract where there should be a stipulation that they've still got to do the beat, whether they've got to rent something or, like you said, if they got a subcon or whatever through approval from the county. But if the machine's down, whether it's newer or older, they've still got to be able to find some way to do that. Just Councilor Prestidge.
Through the chair, I'm okay with this contract, except the 6-year. To me, it should be 10-year. I was watching some of our contractors working today, and believe me, their graders are older than 15 years, and they're working every day. It's all on how you do your maintenance. You can have a 3-year-old grader with no maintenance that is a pile of garbage. Or you can have a 10-year-old grader that's been well maintained. The way heavy equipment is built, it's built to be upgraded, rebuilt. They're not throwaways. So I'd be okay with a 10-year.
Councilor Wilhelm?
Through the chair to administration, Andre, what would your thoughts on having a caveat, or not a caveat, I don't know what the word would be, an addition to it, that 6 years is the minimum requirement, but we could go to 10 years upon administrative inspection of the equipment? Or upon approval of infrastructure director or something to that matter?
Through the chair to Council Wilhelm, if you're gonna have a clause like that, you might as well set it at the maximum number of years. So instead, if you're gonna approve up to 10 years old, then it should be identified units up to 10 years old.
Okay.
Councilor Rose?
Through the chair to admin, so I've got kind of 3 thoughts on this. One is the for starting it off, the 5-year contract length is a little much. I'm suggesting a 2 or 3-year contract with a renewal option in there. Because A, we don't know how it's gonna work, B, we might, and I'm of the mindset that it doesn't matter the age of the equipment either. What we're really looking for is some kind of a clause in here around uptime. We don't care if they might have 5 spare graders sitting in the yard that are 15 years old. I don't care. Dust another one off and just get the job done. It's really about getting the job done. So if there's a way to make this about uptime and performance, I think we'd be further ahead. Because I know I phoned a couple of contractors and I don't think there is one contractor that can bid this at 6 years. It just can't be done. They don't, especially at the price of graders these days. So that's my two thoughts. The other question I had was around the 1,700 hours. So, and this is kind of goes back to the performance idea do you run 1,700 hours with the blade up, 1,700 hours with the, how much of a cut, like, doesn't it kind of have to go back to a performance standard of how many kilometers are graded? I'm just trying to wrap my head around that one. Because you can run 1,700 hours off of the unit without it actually doing anything. But those are my questions.
Andre?
Through the chair to Councilor Burrows, the 1,700 hours is based on the average of what our graders operate. Even though our staff work for, I think it's 2,280 hours, they only grade roughly 1,700 hours, and they are utilized in other areas for other tasks. As far as running around with their blade up or grading, that's why the supervisor is there to review what they are doing. If they are, in the first week, or let's say the first 2 months, they put in 300 hours, yet the roads are not holding up, then that's a discussion that they have to improve their grading ability or the quality that they're doing. As far as the contract, 2 years with a potential 3-year extension, we do that in some of our other contracts. I just don't know if you're going to get the same number of bidders if you're going with a 2 and a 3 year versus an outright 5-year. And I should point out also that prior to, I think it was 2012, I think, the county did have a contract grader, so it's nothing new for Woodlands County.
Councilor Dean?
I just, through the chair, I'd like to concur with Councillor Burrow's suggestion to reduce that term length. I understand there's been a history in the past with contract grading, but it's new to this council, and I think that reduced term length makes sense. The other thing I wanted to point out is Section 26 of this sample contract is essentially a catch-all that gives the county the out, if you will. If the grading service isn't satisfactory, then the agreement gets terminated. So.
Councilor Prestige?
Through the chair to council. The problem with reducing the amount of years in the contract is these contractors have to go buy a $750,000 grader. Probably 90% of them are gonna finance it. So to get financing for 2 or 3 year contract, they're not gonna get financing for the grader if they go to buy one. If they have a 5-year contract, they probably finance it over 5 years. So at the end of the contract, the grader's paid for. So I think we should stick with the 5-year.
Anything else from council? Andre?
Through the chair to council, the one comment that came up was about downtime. We typically put a clause in here on the length of time a unit can be down before they have to come up with an option.
Councilor Wilhelm?
Through the chair to administration, would there be any issue with having the ability for variable contract lengths with different bidders? Like maybe one bidder wants to do 5 years, but another one wants to do 2 years to see if it's a viable option for them moving forward and not get locked in for a full 5 years. Is having the bidder indicating how many years they would like to provide with us, like saying, well, we want a minimum 2-year commitment or something like that, provide to them, would that be an issue?
Through the chair to Council Wilhelm, you can put clauses like that in a contract, but then it can be difficult to compare somebody that gives you 5-year contract at a set rate versus 2-year contract. Typically, contracts are a set rate, or a set period.
Councilor Will?
Through the chair to administration. So I agree with that. I think probably in the past it's been like that too, but if we want to create some flexibility, like a typical contract, take away the historical contracts about these, but a typical contract between two people doing the contract together, a negotiation of time would happen, right? Not always just having a set amount of time. We might actually give ourselves, have more bidders if we have a flexible time frame that they can do it, because like I said, maybe we've got a guy who wants to retire in 2 years and he's the perfect candidate to do this, but so he doesn't want to be tied into a 5-year contract, so we don't end up getting him as a bidder. I mean, I can see the mindset of wanting to have about 5 years, but I don't know why we couldn't have a shorter time frame with chances to opt in for more years. I don't know, I think sticking them to that 5 years specifically, if there are bidders that want to go for slightly less years, I don't know why we'd have an issue with that.
Andre?
Through the chair, Councilor Wilhelm. And I understand that train of thought, but on the backside, you may get bidders that will not bid on a 2-year contract. They will be looking for something for a longer period, so you are potentially eliminating other bidders.
So just to respond,
Okay.
that's why I said, when you're putting the tender out, you could put the tender out as 2 to 5 years and then have them decide, okay, I want 5 years, I want 2 years, another bidder might be 3 years, right? And you can then select the ones that kind of fit the best. Right? I'm not saying it has to be 2 or it has to be 5. I think you could create a range of options for the bidders for flexibility.
Councilor Rose?
Yeah, I took sorry, through the chair, Councilor Wilhelm took the words out of my mouth. That was, that was the idea, is to try and get the maximum flexibility for people that can bid on it, and not to, limit somebody that wants to do 5-year either. So, minimum 2-year, with a maximum 5-year, and you could have an optional, if you do the 2-year, an optional renewal or something if performance standards are in or whatever. So there's got to be a way to build that flexibility into the contract.
I'd like to say, if they had, so the RFP went out for a 2-year to 5-year, somebody bid 2 years, somebody bid 5 years, you should be able to at least take, essentially their bid price divided by the term that they're wanting, and to give you an annual cost to what they're, for a comparison at least year to year, and see what their numbers are looking like and if they're comparable. Just an idea, something we can look at. But I do agree, if we're gonna put it out on a minimum 2-year, as we don't want to be stuck with a year or whatever. But we also have multiple beats we might be looking at too. We might have somebody in maybe the Fort area can only do 2 years, and somebody out here wants to do 5. So it might balance out. Councilor Prestige?
Through the chair to Andre. What kind of, basically, shotgun clause is built in here? Let's say in a year, this contractor, we've had nothing but brief.
Section 26, I think it was.
Yeah, 7 days.
That's it.
It says 7 days in the one in here.
Yeah.
Councilor Pearls?
So, through the chair, with that, is there really a need for that 6-year clause in there? I mean, again, this is all about performance and all about uptime. If they can do it with the machinery that they have, and there are companies that do in-house rebuilding and don't have the new serial numbers under a rebuild like Finning, but if they can't do the job, they're out. I don't like that age of the equipment on there, especially in the market that we're in right now. You're even having trouble finding equipment.
Just a question to administration. If we were to, instead of going with a 6-year age, say we went to a 10-year or a 12-year or something along those lines, the requirements for, that we have on here with the blade and the horsepower and everything else, is that all gonna be affected by that also? Or I'm not an equipment individual, I don't know. Can you have a 10-year-old equipment that can meet the, our standard for blade size or wing or the horsepower?
Yes.
Councilor Rose?
So through the chair, how old is our oldest grader right now?
Through the chair, they are all 7. All of them are the same age. They'll be 8 later this year.
8 years old.
Okay, so we couldn't bid on our own contract under this guideline.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Councilor Willem?
Through the chair to, I guess, council, would council be amenable to raising the limit? I mean, obviously, we have, the graders have to go under inspection by our administration anyways, on any bidding application, as far as I can understand, or before any successful bid will be accepted. Would you guys want to split the difference and just go at 10 years and see what kind of bids we're getting in at that point? I mean, it at the very least eliminates nuisance bids happening with people with old equipment that will never match the requirements of what our bid applications are anyways.
Council? Okay, so we're 10 years on the equipment. As far as contract discussion around that. As well.
And off. If I own that piece of equipment, that's what I'd be looking at. Some flexibility there.
Okay, so in our allows for between 2 to 5 years. We can at least take those prices and divide it by the term they're giving, given annual. So we at least got something to kind of compare to. Does that work with you, Andre?
It's
Can
doable.
you make that work?
We can make it work.
Okay, so just looking at the recommendation here, just as to accept for information, what would be the best direction for this?
Your worship, members of council, just before Andre, the question is there a clause in there for inflation? Like, so they're gonna bid it on an hourly rate, right, for the first year? The second year is built-in inflation, or is it a 2-year term at that rate? Or is it a 5-year term at that rate?
It is a 5-year term at that rate.
Yeah.
If council wishes, it's easier to put a cost index clause in there.
So, and then, your worship, members of council, and the reason why I say that is because then it becomes more difficult to comparison if a contractor bids 2 years at a fixed rate versus a 5-year fixed rate, because you then have to start to extrapolate the numbers. But that 1,700 hours is only based on an estimate. It's not a guarantee that they might need 1,800 or 1,900 hours in one given year because of the conditions of the road, the amount of snow, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, again, if we look at clause that whatever their rate is, that there be an inflation factor put in there, that they would be considered, right? And again, with the understanding that inflation doesn't always applicable to certain things. For example, fuel is, but appliances are part of the calculation of the inflation, right? So vehicles are cost inflation. So you have to kind of look at some of those factors in there when you're determining the inflation factor, right? So, yeah, that's the only thing I'm suggesting that you'll relook at. And then the last thing, your worship, members of council, if I may be, is, again, this would be prepared, council isn't considering contract only at the time when a grader operator retires. Is that, are we going in a different direction that I'm aware of?
I believe
Different.
the discussion that this came up with is we were looking at the cost because we have 2 graders that are coming for replacement, that
Right.
are houred out, and we are looking at other options aside from purchasing or leasing other graders. Aye. Well, should we, to the CEO, Gord, is this something, would we want to bring this back to another GMP? Or is this something you guys, administration feels they have enough information to bring that or back to council?
Well, your worship, members of council, again, once the revised agreement, we can forward it on to council for their approval, and then use it as a template. That would be the template that we would use, and council would adopt that template. And then whenever we go out to contract, right, that's the template that would be used. So it could go directly to council, not coming back to the GM.
Okay, that's where I was getting at here. So council. Anybody willing to make a motion? Councilor Dean?
Before we entertain a motion, I just want to understand the process that we're going through. So, we've kind of part the agreement and come to an understanding of what we want the agreement to say. But what I recall the discussion when we were being asked to consider purchasing a grader was what is the cost of contracting versus what is the cost of purchasing a grader. So we still have that work to do, right?
I think that's when we get the RFD out and we get bids come back, we can get an idea on what the cost is to contract it, because right now we don't have those costs.
Okay, all right.
So I think this is just determining as far as the tender package, like on the contract here, if it's not, we can set the, I guess, requirements for the equipment and the need, and then get contractors to take a look for a price on that. Once we have that price, we can look and see what the cost is versus comparison of an equipment.
Okay, thanks for the clarification, and I'd be prepared to move that the Governance and Priorities Committee accept the motor grading contracting out criteria as information with the following changes. Term length variable between 2 and 5 years. And help me out, guys, what am I forgetting? What's the
10-year minimum on the equipment.
And a 10-year minimum age of the equipment,
Maximum.
maximum.
Friendly.
Okay, so we got a motion on the floor. Any discussion from council on that one? See none, I'll call the question. All in favor? It's passed. Thank you, Andre.
Can we take 5?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, it's been over an hour here. I guess we'll take 5 minutes. See, it's 10 after 7. You guys want 5 minutes or 10 minutes, Bruce?
5 for me.
Well, we'll take 5 minutes. We'll be back at 7:50. Okay, 6.3, water and sewage rate discussion. Andre again.
No, this is me.
No,
Oh, sorry, I'm on didn't open up the highlight there. Sorry, thank you, Victoria.
No problem, okay. So this is, again, this is more a conversation piece. So at any point, if councils or the workshop want to ask me questions, feel free to interrupt. So this is a discussions on the water and wastewater rate discussions as well, kind of in a combination of the life cycle of the assets management discussions on the water and wastewater. Okay. So talk about MGA, it delegates the public utility operations to municipalities. So a kind of like an offside story is that some municipality actually create a organizations to run the water and wastewater as a separate entity, so that it will reduce the burdens on the borrowings, and then also if there's any profits made from the water and wastewater, it could come back to the municipality as a dividends. Of course, right now, Woodlands County might not be able to do that because we still have a relatively small numbers of users. But this is under the MGA that allows the municipality to go to a different model. Council adopted bylaw 529/19 back in September 3rd, 2019, and that established the 3-year rate for the water wastewater from January 1st, 2020 to January 1st, 2022. So the rate kind of expires right now. We're still using a 2022 rate. So some statistic information. So from 2020 to 2023, those are the consumption statistic in cubic meters. So on the left-hand side, those are the total accounts numbers based on different class. So residential users, in 2020, we have 251, and then it dropped down to 243 in 2022. And the consumption rates, maybe that is so from 2020, we have 57,000 cubic meters. In 2022, the usage only 35,000 cubic meters. Nonprofits relatively stable in terms of the numbers, but I guess that it is coming out from the COVID. The nonprofit have more activities, so the usage in water jumped from 488 to 1,800 cubic meters. Commercials kind of comes and goes.
Victoria, sorry. Who are what are the nonprofit users?
Could be churches,
Community halls,
community halls.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
ag society.
Thanks. Okay.
And then the commercials, the numbers from 19 in 2022, from 2020, and then in 2022, the numbers of account holders 18. That is steadily growth in the commercial usage. And then the county, it's just our own operations, and of course, we don't bill ourselves. So the total consumptions is ranging from 44,000 cubic meters in 2020 to 2022, 45,000 cubic meters. And then the next slide just shows that the percentage of the account type. So as you can see that the residentials represent our majority of the users, 78.79%. Then commercials is only, let me see here, commercials about 16%. It means that because of the sheer number of the residential users, so even if we're going to apply a different rate for commercials, it might not make a significant change or jump in the revenue because the representation is still relatively small. Okay, and then the next slide talks about the average usage by different types of accounts. So the residentials, again, the average drop down, so I guess that was some conservation effort. So in 2020, the average usage was 148 or 149 cubic meters. In 2022, only 147. The commercial did jump up from 2020 for 335 to 413. And as well as I mentioned that the nonprofit, because of the post-COVID environment, that the usage also jump up a bit as well. So with the water wastewaters, that is a food cost recovery model, which is across Canada, that we supposed to be cost neutral, or we should at least cover our operations. And right now, because it doesn't mandate it has to be food cost recovery, prudent for us that the asset management planning is how are we going to achieve that, or are we going to do it progressively? Because in the next slide you will see why we're talking about this. So right now, based on the revenues and then the expenses, every year we're running like over $1 million deficit. What it means is that the revenues that we collected from the water user account did not cover all the expense. So, and what it means is that this annual deficit is coming from the general operations, meaning that is from the property tax that we generate. So we are not on the food cost recovery. As a matter of fact, we are about 17 or 18% of the cost recovery rate. Okay.
Well, question for you, Victoria. Given that we're about 80% off the mark for cost recovery, is that due to maintenance on the facilities and the lines, due to aging? Do we know, is that due to age-specific problems? Or what is the big discrepancy versus what we're putting out versus what we're getting back?
So that is a requirements to, let's say for the wastewater, that is a requirements, whether it is a hamlet for 10 people or a big city of Edmonton, you have close to 500,000. So right now, the reason we're running in a deficit is that we don't have the scale of the economy. We don't have enough consumers or users. But then we also have to maintain the expense because of the wastewater, the pipe, all that, so, yeah. So there are different pricing models that we can consider. So a flat rate, constant rate that is based on the volume, or a tier rate. So it could be a block of volume that from 0 to how many cubic meters, you can have a flat rate or a tier rate. Right now, the county is using a combination of flat rates and constant rates. So we charge a monthly fee, a flat rate, plus the consumptions. So this is the current model we are using.
Councilor Prestige?
Through the chair to Victoria. So if we did a total cost recovery, what would that cost our residents? And
Don't like
I know what they're gonna say is we pay our taxes. We're not paying for water and sewer too.
So if you go back to slide, the summary of the costing model, let's say 2022, we're running into a deficit of 1.3 or 1.3 or close to $1.4 million deficit. And the total user, go back to the numbers, we have about 300 account. So just to cover that by those 300 users, we also consider that the ability to pay. So that is why right now at this point, I'm not, like, I think this is the discussion is that how far we want to go to a maybe 25% cost recovery or something like that progressively, but definitely, yeah,
I
it,
don't think they'd be happy another $400 a month in their bill. Councilor Prestige?
Like, you gotta look at it both ways, like, the county doesn't pay me back for my well and my sewer system in my place, which is very expensive. But I can't see a resident in Blue Ridge paying $400 a month for water and sewer
On top of what they're already paying.
On top.
on top of what they're paying. So it's,
Quick question for you, Victoria. This just covers our hamlets. This doesn't cover the water from the subdivisions with the ICF, the water agreement with the town.
So right now, all the revenues we collected is based on the accounts we have, and then including some of the bulk purchase from the water stations.
Right.
Yeah, and then the expense would be all the water treatment plant, overhead costs.
All right, so it's just our facilities, not the water we're purchasing from the town.
No,
Councilor Wilhelm?
So through the chair to council, I don't think that administration is suggesting we do full cost recovery, because it's obviously not possible. But what level of cost recovery do we want to do?
She's still got a.
I don't know, getting way ahead, I apologize.
sorry, what was the question? I'm sorry.
You can continue.
Oh, okay.
I'm jumping ahead.
Okay. Okay, so the next one is that we also have to consider some of the water infrastructure's life cycle. So depending on the components of certain items, well house would be 75 years, but then the pumps is only 25 years. Again, this is just an average. It doesn't mean that by 25 years we shall replace the pumps, but this is kind of like a rule of thumb that we should plan ahead for it. So this is just an average estimations, but something I just want to kind of bring the attention is that, for instance, the mains, for the iron is 50 years, ductile irons is 50 years. Those are the typical material that is used to construct water mains in the 60s and 70s. And if you're doing the math, 50 years old, kind of beyond that. And then we do have some mains that is built in the 60s and 70s. So again, it doesn't mean that they have to be replaced right now, but something we should have that more conversation on that. So the infrastructure's expenditures, based on the functions, the supply, treatment, storage, and distributions. And those are the three projects that right now has been identified for the water and wastewater. So in 26-27, the project is the sanitary line replacement for the Assiniboine. Right now, the estimated cost in today's value is $1 million. We do definitely need financing, given if we're not putting additional money aside for the reserve. And based on the inflations, by 2026, I will believe that the cost will be $1.6 million. In 2031, another project is for the airport water line, the loop additions. Right now, we anticipated that the cost would be $1.5 million. In 2031, we anticipate that it will be up to $2.6 million. And then in 2033, the water line replacement in Fort Assiniboine, today's value is $2.5 million. We anticipate that 10 years from now, we'll probably double the cost. So those are the total projects for the next 10 years. Total right now for today's value is $5 million or $5.2 million with the projected inflationary impact. Now, in a perfect world, we should at least set aside $500,000 a year. Because it's 10 years, $5 million, if we don't want to go to financing, we should at least set aside $500,000 to fund for this future project. So we have 3 outstanding debentures for the water capital financing. So the maturity date vary from September 2030 to September 2031. The interest rate we're locking back then is relatively low, from 2.15% to 3.84%. But you can see that the outstanding balance, there was a lot. We're talking about close to over $2.4 million. So right now, just for repaying the water capital financing, we're talking about $322,000. That includes the principal and interest. So in terms of the capital cost financing alternative, that is true for us, such as charging development charges, fees and charges, connection fee, local improvement levy. We can use the reserve. Right now, we only have $200,000. And then also, right now, is that the funding, our deficit is funded from our general municipal services. Right now, it's charged under the Department of Infrastructures as an operating cost. So the annual cost, including the operations plus the capital. The rates right now, in the perfect world, is that the total cost divided by volume. But as I mentioned, we have a relatively small base of populations and a small base of consumption. So that is why I said at this point, I don't think we can do a full cost recovery. It's just that we cannot achieve the scale of economy unless the council know that that would be a future growth. And yes, I think we can have that conversation. But I think at this point is that we are aiming to increase the cost recovery percentage. So scenario number one is that assuming is that the numbers of account holders and the consumption's kind of the same, and then we're using the 3 years average. Because 2023 is a partial year, we're going to start on September 1st. We are going to proposing that we're going to increase the flat rates from $20 to $20 per month. And then for the residentials, the rate will be from $1.50 to $2 for each meter consumption. And then the commercials will be from $1.50 to $2.05. And then you will see that in the next slide is that the increase is not, we're not talking about a big amount. So we are talking about, based on these numbers, we are talking about a cost recovery of 19.9%. So from 17% to 19%. And then scenario number two, again, still based on the same assumption that the numbers of account holders and consumptions didn't vary too much. This one is that we increased the flat rate from $20 to $30, and then the rate increases from $1.50 to $2. Again, this one, for this scenario, is that we don't make any difference for commercials and residentials. And this one, because of the flat rate increase, so the cost recovery is 20%. So the changes to the commercial rate with insignificant adjustment, we're talking about $10,000. So again, it's just because we have a very small amount of commercial account holders. At this point, future growth and demographic changes are not considered in this scenario because it's still unknown. Okay, and then scenario number three, everything remain constant except that the flat rate from $20 to $30, and then the rates for consumption is from $1.50 to $2.15, and then the commercial from $1.50 to $2.25. And then this one, it will change our cost recovery to 21%. Again, if you look at the total operating revenue, we're still talking about $300,000. It's just that we have a very small numbers of account holders and the consumption rate. So then the next slide just talks about the summary of three pricing scenarios. So scenario number one, $2 for the residential, $2.05 for commercials, $25 flat rate. The total revenue is $293. Cost recovery at 19.9%. Scenario number two, $2 flat rate. $2 rate for both commercials and residentials, and a $30 flat rate. The cost recovery is 20.6. And in scenario number three, $2.15 for residential, $2.25 for commercial, plus a $30 flat rate. That makes the cost recovery to 21%. So you can see that because of the numbers in the residential and commercial and even the total numbers, the changes is not really sensitive. You can see that we're still talking about total revenue ranging from $293,000 to $309,000. So the recommendation is that we progressively increase the contributions to the water and wastewater reserve accounts, because we know that there are three major projects coming down the pipe, and right now we don't have the reserves to fund that unless the council is ready for another financing. And we can incorporate segregated user type by residentials and commercials. And again, we can also consider the inflation impact and future infrastructure needs for the rate increase in the future. But we also considering about the ability to pay as well. So the recommended course of actions is that starting January 1st, 2026, let me back up. So we're going to prepare the water rate bylaw based on the scenarios. So effective September 1st, 2023, using scenario number 1, and then for January 1st, 2024, using the pricing model number 3. And then we also increased the rate for the bulk water from $7 to $8. And then increased from $2 cubic meters, and increased.
Sorry, Tom?
Administration, in regards to, say, number 4, increase the rate of bulk water from 7 to 8, and then dollar increase every year after. Are you talking about every year after up to 2026, or every year moving forward is going to go up by $1?
So right now we're using 2022 rates, so I would say that the dollar would be every year, like 24, 25, 26.
And then just keep continuing on every year, increasing it up, or
Until-
cap it
cap-
at 2026?
Cap to 2026, and then the council can make another bylaw at that
Correct,
time.
okay, thank you.
Anything else, Victoria?
Yeah, that's all. Any questions?
Okay. Questions from council? Councilor Dean?
So just for clarity here, I just did some quick math based on how many users versus how many total cubic meters. And it looks like each account on average is around 150 cubic meters used.
So you can see that from the average use is on slide, let me see here.
6.
Yes. So it's breakdown by the type of account. So it's on page, let me see, page 38 on my package. It should be a graph.
Yeah, so it's at about
Yeah.
150.
150 for the residentials, and then commercials 147 for the residentials, commercial 413 cubic meters.
But that's annually, right? Or is
Yes,
that a month?
annually, yeah.
Annually. So if you bump the rate by 50 cents, then they're gonna pay annually an additional $75 on usage. So broken by month, it's pretty
And then,
palatable.
and then depending on how sensitive they are, so sometimes recognizing that is an increase, so some people might cut down the usage, so we might not generate as much revenue as we anticipated as well.
Okay.
Question I have for administration, with these 3 main, I guess, capital projects we have coming up to our water system, have we started, I guess, actively looking at grants that may be available federally or provincially to help cover those? Given they are our water and sewer, I know that they're kind of a lifeline for a lot of communities. I'm just wondering if we've started looking at what's available.
Through the chair to council, get closer to their replacement than we would.
Right. Councilor Burrows?
Through the chair to the administration, so in that section of the old ferry loop, we already have kind of all the infrastructure in place, but it was an option whether to tie in or not, and a lot of people have, well, some people and some people have to tie into it. I'm looking at, like, we could, closer to Gosford, cut density, right? How many people are actually hooked to that system? Do we know how many people are not hooked to that system down there as a way, and if the hookup fee is a stumbling block, over a period of time to move to cost recovery, if we're doing cost recovery on selling water or supplying water, and we can double the amount of people that are tied into that system, can we, I just don't know the numbers. Do you know how many people are tied in?
Through the chair, Council Burrows, yes, we know, we don't have that number here.
I guess just to follow up then, Victoria, does that logic track at all? To get more people to hook up to the system if the plumbing's already in the ground, we paid for it,
Yes.
and you're getting more people to hook up to it?
Yes.
Yeah, this is our Hamlets.
Oh, that's the Hamlets? Is that the Hamlets?
Including the airport as well.
It includes the
Includes
airport.
everything.
So it's all the water? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I asked earlier, so I was asking for was just the Hamlets.
Sorry,
No, that's okay.
I assumed the way she answered the question, it was everything.
Yeah, it's,
Sorry, I just misunderstood that. Andre?
Sorry, I was just gonna say it is all the systems together.
Okay, so, no, at my question then, at the airport, we're tied into the town at the airport, or is that our own system there?
We are tied in, we buy water from the town.
So my question for that, would it be something then, given the, again, hookup fees and everything that we have to keep paying off to our neighbor, would it be something beneficial down the road for us to possibly look at grant funding or whatever from the federal and provincial? So I think the town did theirs on a third federal, third provincial, and a third municipal funding, be able to supply their own. Would it, if we're talking about, we're talking about doing, I know some bad, would it be cheap, viable for us if we're not buying from the place versus supplying our own? Long run.
If I understand correctly, if we had our own water plant,
Our own water, sewer that service that area of the loop instead of buying from the town. Would that increase or?
it would definitely add to the price. The cost of building water, water intake, water treatment and sewage, we'd be talking millions.
So your worship, members of council, that's why the Alberta government came up with the Water for Life strategy, where they would have regional services that would then provide services. So, I don't know how far Edmonton goes, but they go as far as Vegreville at least in regards to providing water
My
services.
question with Edmonton, we're using that as an example, do they run that as a commission? Or does the city of Edmonton have say over what they're selling it?
My understanding is it's a commission, but the city of Edmonton runs the service, if I remember correctly.
Well, this is just kind of getting back, I know we're talking about costs and stuff, but we're also, we're buying the service, and I understand it would be an expense, but it's also an expense currently that we don't really have control over either.
Yeah, however, your worship, members of council, we did preliminary estimates, I think now 3 years ago, in regards to looking at some type of regional services and even running, including Mayor Thorpe in the scenario. And again, it was far cheaper to do it regionally versus independently. Right, so.
Anything else from council? Council Burrows?
So just one thing on my understanding of the water agreement out there is the offsite levies for anyone on the residential side, they're paid. That was part of a lump sum payment. The stuff at the airport is under a different agreement. The stuff that's under the commercial area or the industrial part, that's the one that's double the offsite levies. So if we're, so there's a few incentives, I guess, that might be. So based on the amount of money that we're paying for water from the town, are we just paying the bill from the town, or are we making a little bit on that?
We just pay, right? We just pay.
Through the chair, we make a little bit on what we pay the town.
Okay, so the more people we hook up, the better. I'd be curious to know the numbers if we can add the, I mean, it might be nothing. Like I said, it all comes down to density, is the issue. And there are other, like if we could get some grant money, there are other areas that are close to that system that could tie into water that I know there's lots of people down Horn Road and that I ran into interested in tying into something like that too, so.
Tower Road as well.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else from minister, or council? Anything else from administration? Councilor Wilhelm?
To the chair to council, so then is the mindset then that we want to proceed forward with the recommended action on the changing the rates over the course of time till 2026? I mean, it makes sense to me. We have to find a way to recover some of these costs. And this is a very gradual way to do that.
That's not a very large impact.
Yeah, it seems like a minimal impact, but you know, we're getting almost 5% more cost recovery over time.
Councilor Prestige, just a question to you, given that this is, you know, like, I guess one of your areas that'll impact.
I agree that we have to raise it, but I don't think it's gonna be accepted very well.
Councilor Wilhelm?
I'm gonna make a motion that governance priority committee forwards proposed rates for the 2023 water and wastewater rate bylaw as per the recommended actions at the end of the presentation.
So scenario one.
Yeah, water rate effective September 1, 2023 is using scenario 1 pricing model, and then as of January 1st, implementing scenario 3 pricing model for increased contribution to reserve to fund for future infrastructure needs, and then step 4 and step 5. I think it makes sense.
A motion on the floor, any discussion from council? Seeing none, I'll call the question, all in favor? And that is carried. So our next meeting date is September 13th, 6 p.m. in the council chambers, and that takes us down to number 8, motion to adjourn. Councilor Will.
Motion to adjourn.
No discussion on that. All in favor? We're adjourned at 7:50.